Today, we have 5 true ghost stories that get progressively scarier. Watch until the end to hear about a woman's terrifying paranormal encounter whilst playing the piano. Please like and subscribe to this channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. I'm your host, Severed Soul. My Cousin, Sharon, by Reddit user Simply Effing Haunted. When I was young, about 5 years old, I had a cousin named Sharon. Sharon was born with serious heart conditions that required her to undergo multiple surgeries. Unfortunately, on what would have been her final surgery, Sharon passed away at the tender age of 2. My mother was asleep in our apartment a few miles away from the hospital when she woke up to a peculiar sight. She saw Sharon running around our living room, waving and saying goodbye. Fearing the worst, my mother called the hospital and received that devastating news that Sharon had passed away. However, this was just the beginning of the strange occurrences. Not long after Sharon's passing, my grandparents returned home to find coat hangers rattling and the bathroom sink running with boiling hot water. They couldn't find any logical explanation for the rattling coat hangers, and they were certain that they turned the water off before they left the house. It was just then that my grandmother remembered one of Sharon's favourite activities, playing with water. Shortly after this incident, my grandmother woke one night to see a luminous orb hovering in her bedroom. Subsequently, she sought guidance from a priest, who conveyed that the presence of the orb was indicative of an angelic being. As she passed by her kitchen china cabinet, which housed a figurine depicting an angel, she was completely startled when the figurine spontaneously started to play a tune. It was at that very moment that she realised the significance of the day. It was the anniversary of Sharon's passing. Furthermore, both my aunt and uncle have shared their own experiences with Sharon's apparition. Also, my mother and my grandmother have both experienced remarkably vivid dreams where they were visited by Sharon. Despite the fact that she departed from this world almost 2 decades ago, we still possess a profound conviction that she is still somehow present among us. My family considers us incredibly fortunate to have our very own guardian angel, none other than my cousin Sharon. The Golf Shop Ghost, by Reddit user J4 Utah. Some background. I used to work at a golf course over the summer. I say used to because I was laid off over the winter and I don't plan on going back. Here's why. The golf course is in a rather secluded area. It's surrounded by farm country and actually used to be an old farmstead, which is close to 100 years old. It was converted by the previous owner into a golf course. First time I noticed something was off about that place was when me and a co-worker were sitting in the office on a rather slow day. Towards the end of our shift, we heard the door alarm sound. I was the first one to stand up to go and see if this was a customer or just somebody that needed to use the restroom. It happened to be neither, because when I walked into the main room, there was nobody there. Some might say it was just the system malfunctioning, but this was becoming quite a frequent occurrence. Then, one night, there was a really bad storm, which meant there were no golfers around. We probably shouldn't even have been working due to the bad weather, but we work for the city, so they had us working out there anyway. That night, there was a very strange occurrence. We were in the office again when we heard laughter coming from out in the main room. At first, we thought maybe someone had come into the main room for a drink, which seems daft now because we didn't hear the door alarm chime. As we left the office towards the main room, the laughter suddenly stopped, but we carried on out there anyway. Nobody was in the building except for me and my co-worker. As soon as we came to the realisation that there was nobody there, we both stopped in our tracks. That's when the office door abruptly slammed shut behind us. You might say it was potentially caused by a draft. However, all the windows and doors in that place were closed and locked. Following encounter is probably the most terrified I've ever been in my whole life. Me and 2 other co-workers were closing up. Coincidentally, that day I'd been telling my co-workers that I thought the place was haunted. This backfired. It scared them so much that they refused to be in there alone to set the alarm. So of course, this duty fell to me, and they sent me back in there to set the alarm. As I punched in the alarm code on the panel, I heard something on my left-hand side. I kid you not, my blood instantly ran cold. As I turned my phone flashlight towards where the sound came from, there was a man in a white cardigan and a golfer's hat standing there. Naturally, I booked it out of that place as quickly as possible. Of course, I told my co-workers, but they didn't really believe me, not that it matters. I know what I saw, and I'm never going to work back at that place. No, thank you. Eerie Attic, by Reddit user Am I Haunted? A few years ago, I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Melbourne, Australia. It was my first time living on my own. The apartment block had been built in the 1930s. I'd been there for a few months when one day I came home from work and went into the bathroom. I saw something really strange. A wooden board that covered a hole in the ceiling that led to a small attic space lay fractured on the floor in 2 pieces. I examined the board. This piece of wood was an inch thick, and it would have taken Bruce Lee to break it. I presumed the landlord had sent someone to work on the attic. I was frozen stiff with fear. Someone is up there for sure, I thought. I emailed the landlord, asking if anyone had been in there, with an undertone of annoyance, as I hadn't been warned. Her reply simply read, "Please call me as soon as it's convenient." So I called her, and she explained that her previous 2 tenants had complained about exactly the same thing. She promised to replace the board, and she did. A month later, I woke up at around 4 AM. My body was covered in goosebumps. It really felt like someone was rubbing their cold hands all over me. Everything was silent. That was until I heard a dragging sound coming from above my bed. It sounded like someone was pulling a sack of potatoes. I froze, convinced someone was up there. There was no way an animal could have been making that noise. After 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light. I armed myself with a cricket bat and walked into the bathroom. That's when I saw that wooden board, once again, was on the floor broken in 2. I felt sick. The dragging sound had stopped, but now I could hear something else. Something entirely more terrifying. The sound was whispering, and it was coming from the attic. It sounded like children's voices, and I could hear one sentence repeated over and over again.
"It's your turn. It's your turn."
I switched on every light in that apartment to try to make things feel normal. It was 5 AM and still dark outside. I turned the TV on to try to unwind, but then a fuse blew. My pet budgie, Dexter, whom I kept in the kitchen, usually never made a sound at night. But all of a sudden, he started squawking as if he was being strangled. I'd never heard him make those sort of noises. He was literally screaming. I grabbed my car keys, ran outside, and sat in my car. I waited there until the sun came up. When I saw people walking their dogs, this comforted me just enough to go back inside. The front door was open, but I figured I must have left it open when I left in a rush. I went to the kitchen to check on Dexter, but he wasn't there. He wasn't in his cage. I felt sick again. All my windows were closed, so I checked everywhere in the apartment. When I walked into the bathroom, I could hear splashing, and there was Dexter, half drowning in the toilet. I took him out of the toilet and washed him and dried him. I was so confused. At 8 AM, I called the landlord and gave her a slightly watered down version of what had just happened. "Oh wow, you heard the whispering too," she said. I stayed in that apartment for another 18 months. I heard the whispering on a few more occasions, and twice that board in the bathroom had moved. Although I live elsewhere now, recently the landlord called me. She said her new tenants had begged to talk to me about things that were going on in that apartment. I said forget it, it's their problem now. The Hallway, by Reddit user Garlic Salt 27. During either my junior or senior year of high school, my dad moved into a new house after a divorce from my ex-stepmom. I had two younger siblings between the two of them, a younger sister and a younger brother. I lived with my mum for the majority of the time during high school and stayed on campus during my first college semester. This meant that when I stayed at my dad's, I had to share a room at this house with my younger sister, Anna. For context, Anna is about 9 years younger than me. Alex, my younger brother by 6 years, had his own room down the hallway. This incident took place in the upstairs hallway. For further context, this hallway comes off from the kitchen. Going down it, you'll pass the kids' bathroom on the left, with Alex's bedroom door further down on the right. Continuing down, the hallway ends in a small square, with the entrances to mine and Anna's room and Dad's room sitting caddy corner to each other. One night, the summer before I started college, I was coming home late after a date with my at-the-time boyfriend. It was about 2 AM, so everyone in the house was asleep. When I entered the house, I could tell my dad was asleep because I could hear his snoring. I went upstairs and walked to my room. Alex and Dad's doors were both shut, so I knew they were both asleep. Anna was fast asleep in our room, so I threw my phone onto the bed. I went to the bathroom to get ready for bed. I shut the bathroom door and started to get dressed for bed and brushed my teeth. As I was finishing up and brushing my hair, I heard a noise come from outside the bathroom. It was in the hallway. This didn't really surprise me, as Alex usually gets up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. I went to open the door to tell him that I'd only be just a second, but as I went to turn the handle, I stopped. The first noise I heard had been the creaking of the wooden flooring in the hallway, but now I heard a different noise. This noise was breathing. Now that doesn't sound scary in itself, but this wasn't normal breathing. It was a very heavy breathing, not laboured or anything, just heavy. I don't know how to explain it, but there's definitely a difference between a kid's breathing and adult's breathing when you hear it in dead silence. The breathing I could hear definitely sounded like it was coming from an adult. I could still hear my dad snoring, so I knew it wasn't him. It couldn't be Alex. That's why I stopped in the first place. In addition to the breathing, I could now hear footsteps. As the footsteps moved towards the kitchen, they sounded heavy, like a grown man was walking around. This is when I started to panic. My first thought was that this was an intruder. There was a sliding back door in the kitchen, which led to the backyard, and our fence was by no means unclimbable. I was worried that one of the kids might have left it open when they went to the park behind the house, and nobody had noticed. I knew for sure that I'd locked the front door when I came in, but since I hadn't used it, I hadn't checked the back door. Since this all made sense in my mind, I started to panic even more. I locked the bathroom door and held my breath. I could hear that breathing coming back down the hallway. The creaking of the floorboards showed me how close he was to the bathroom door. I held my breath, frozen in absolute fear. The breathing was very heavy and crystal clear, like a man was standing directly on the other side of the bathroom door. I was shaking with fear. My dad always kept his door locked at night, so he couldn't help my siblings. And I didn't have my phone on me, it was on my bed. I didn't have any sort of weapon in the bathroom. I hadn't heard any more movement from outside the door, but the breathing was still there. I slowly and quietly knelt down so I could look under the door. I was looking for feet. I was so terrified I could hear my heart breathing in my ears. But to my surprise, there was nothing there. No feet, nothing. And the breathing had stopped too. And the creaking noise had gone. So I got up, slowly, trying to be as quiet as possible. And I grabbed my hairbrush. I figured that was the best thing I had to use as a weapon. And I was just going to open the door and make a mad dash for my bed so I could get my phone. I held the hairbrush and unlocked the door quietly, then held my breath so I could listen. Nothing. I whipped the door open and looked up and down the hallway. Nothing. I ran to my bedroom and grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend who I'd been on a date with a few hours prior. I even asked him if he'd been in the house after he'd dropped me off. I was so sure there was someone there. With him on the phone, I went through and checked the whole house. I found nothing. I checked both the back door and the front door and they were both locked. Alex and Anna were still peacefully sleeping, and I could tell by Dad snoring that he was still asleep too. I went to bed that night with my door locked. The next morning when we woke up, I told my dad everything that had happened. He could tell that I was genuinely really scared, so he checked the whole house. Apparently, we had an alarm system too, which hadn't gone off that night, so it wasn't an intruder, or at least not a person. But it was so real and so terrifying that I didn't go back to visit my dad for a while after that. And it was a good few months before I spent the night in that house again. The Little Hands, by Reddit user Patented Space Hook. I've never lived in a haunted house, but my mother did when she was a teen. Other houses on her street had strange things going on too. A few homes away from my mother lived a family. One night, the young daughter had gone to bed with a bad headache. The next day, unfortunately, the little girl had died. She'd passed away from an aneurysm. After the funeral, the girl's family decided to go away to get their minds off the tragedy. The girl's father asked my uncle, my mother's brother, to check in on their pets while they were away. And my mum and dad, who were dating at the time, went with him. My mother had heard there was a grand piano in the house, and she really wanted to play it. My dad at the time was studying to be a veterinarian. Immediately after entering the house, my dad and my uncle went to the basement to check on the pets. My mother went to the ground floor to look for the piano. She was playing the piano when she felt something brush against her ankles. She just presumed the cat had left the basement and walked past her. So she kept playing, but then she felt it again. She looked underneath the piano and saw nothing, so she brushed it off and started to play again. But as she started to play, she felt two hands grasp her legs tightly. She made a dash for the basement door, called my uncle and father, and waited there for them. Back outside, my uncle could tell my mum was rattled, and he asked her what was wrong. She told him what had happened, and he turned white with shock. He told her that the family's daughter who had just passed away used to play a game with her father. When he played on that piano, she used to crawl underneath and grab his ankles and push his feet up and down on the pedals. I really hope you enjoyed those stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for a feast of grim and grisly content. I'm your host, Severed Soul.